All right, it's 4 o'clock, so I will call this fifth special meeting of the Civic Works Committee to order. I will say at the beginning that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest today? There being none, we'll move on to the consent items, of which there are none. No scheduled items, so we'll have items for direction. 4.1, which is a history of London's rapid transit initiative, and I understand there's going to be a 25-minute staff presentation, and so we'll start our watches. And Mr. Hayward, I understand you're up first, so please go ahead.
Good start. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, Council has directed staff to prepare a list of projects that are likely to be eligible for senior government funding and to present that list at a public participation meeting on March the 20th. The timeline we've got to deliver on that list to the provincial and federal governments is by March the 31st, which is roughly 60 days from the date it was announced. However, the purpose of tonight, Council also directed staff to provide a history and status of the BRT project, and that's really the focus of what we're bringing to you tonight for your information and receipt. So Jenny Ramsey will review the planning documents that have informed the BRT plan. We'll update you on the status of the environmental assessment, and we'll walk you through the project in more detail towards the end of the presentation. At the end, Scott Mathers, who I just want to recognize for stepping up under difficult circumstances to help guide us through this 60-day project, will wrap up and transition us to the next steps. By way of context, the Bus Rapid Transit project was a project that Council approved for submission under the PTIS funding, or the Public Transit Infrastructure Stream funding. To be eligible, projects needed to improve capacity, quality, safety, or access to public transit. This project is approximately $500 million in total cost, and of that, we were looking to the federal government to supply roughly $200 million, $170 million from the provincial government, and $130 from the municipal sources, primarily development charges, which meant that it was part of a background study that we're just going through again. Bottom line was, this was an opportunity to renew and expand our infrastructure at a quarter of the cost to the local taxpayers and ratepayers. And with that, I'll pass it over to Jenny to get you into the history.
All right, thank you, Martin. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jenny Ramsey, and I'm the project director for Rapid Transit. While I've been involved in this project for, I'm going to move the mic over a little bit. While I've been involved in this project for just under 2 years, the Rapid Transit plan that we have today is the result of 15 years of planning, engineering, consultation to determine what Londoners would like to see as the city grows. London has long prioritized transportation planning as a foundation of overall city building and development. Through several citywide studies and extensive consultation, rapid transit has been incorporated into every major city building document since 2004. It was in the 2004 Transportation Master Plan when we first began exploring the idea of rapid transit. LTC studies in 2006 and 2008 looked at long-term growth strategies for improving and increasing ridership based on a rapid transit system. The BRT plan that we have today has been built on 3 guiding documents: London's Transportation Master Plan, Smart Moves 2030, the London Plan, and London's Rapid Transit Environmental Assessment Initiative. So let's start by taking a closer look at the Smart Moves 2030 Transportation Master Plan. Developed between 2009 and 2013, the Transportation Master Plan aims to improve all modes of transportation while addressing and shaping the city's population growth and mobility needs. It allocates more than $1 billion for transportation improvements across the city over the next 20 years. Rapid transit is one of the key pillars of the plan. It's designed to work with other planned improvements to make it easier for all Londoners to move around. In addition to rapid transit, Smart Moves includes $800 million in strategic road improvements and enhanced active transportation. The TMP works together with the London Plan to encourage infill development and increase densities. The goal is to promote sustainability, walkability, and revitalization of neighborhoods and business areas. As the Transportation Master Plan was wrapping up, it fed into the London Plan to develop a blueprint for the city's future. The plan aims to shape growth in London over the next 20 years. It started in 2012 with research, studies, and consultation with more than 10,000 Londoners. It talks about the importance of intensification, with clear targets to curb the type of urban sprawl and that cost taxpayers more and eats up agricultural land. The London Plan outlines how well-designed streets that include a rapid transit system can help London grow inward and upward, save money, and attract people. A key part of the London Plan is transit corridors, where there is the greatest potential to tap into inward and upward growth with taller and denser buildings. We're already seeing this to be true. Like other cities across North America with rapid transit systems, the city has already seen lots of interest in development along the proposed corridors. Building on the London Plan, the Rapid Transit Environmental Assessment was initiated in 2015. So there were two phases to the environmental assessment. Phase 1 was work done on the Rapid Transit Master Plan between 2015 and 2017. The first priority was exploring what type of rapid transit system would meet London's needs. We looked at light rail, bus rapid transit, and a hybrid system. We also explored where rapid transit would run, looking at different route options across the city. With approval of the master plan in 2017, Council gave the green light to a full BRT system and established the routes. Phase 2 was the Transit Project Assessment Process, or TPAP, which applies to all large transit projects within Ontario. It started with a pre-planning stage where the project team consulted with the public on various options for how BRT would look in different parts of the city. Through consultation with the public and further study, we honed in on the finer details of the plan, including where transit-only lanes should run, such as center running or curbside. This work resulted in the draft environmental project report, which describes the preliminary design, its potential impacts, and how to address those impacts. Council approved that draft environmental project report last May, kicking off the formal TPAP 120-day consultation period. The public, stakeholders, and agencies had the opportunity to provide feedback on that report. And as a result of that feedback, we've refined the draft environmental project report and are about to wrap up our environmental assessment. So the TPAP 120-day period is expected to wrap up at the end of this month. That'll kick off 30 days of a public comment period, followed by 35 days for a minister's decision. So in June, London will have a completed environmental assessment, which incorporates all these years of planning and study into a preliminary recommended design. So here it is. This is the full BRT network map that you're used to seeing. There's the Northeast L corridor and the Southwest 7 corridor, which form a loop in the downtown where people can switch between the routes. It's 24 kilometers in total, and every major road on the route would be revitalized by the project. The BRT routes would include transit-only lanes that would take buses out of the way of general traffic on some of London's busiest corridors. The project would include 28 modern buses, possibly electric, picking up passengers every 5 or 10 minutes. BRT would also integrate with local transit to improve overall bus service citywide. Now, although BRT has been advanced as a single project, it's really made up of 5 key components. These components can stand alone or work in combination with other projects, such as the one on the project list released yesterday. Each offers its own impacts to the transportation network. By unbundling the plan this way, it's possible to move forward with elements that Council may want to prioritize at this time, and there may be other areas that we can further explore. Whether built as a full system or in its component pieces, advancing elements of BRT will provide transportation and mobility benefits. Because of the highly integrated approach to city planning over the last decade, the outcomes of the proposed plan are geared towards all Londoners, not just transit riders. The plan would ease congestion by taking buses out of general traffic lanes, improve road safety by repairing aging roads and adding safe turning opportunities, widen roads to reserve space for transit and for future transportation needs and technologies, support active mobility, and add smarter traffic signals. On the list that was released yesterday, you would have seen the rapid transit project separated into its 5 components. So what I'd like to do next is take you through each of those 5 components in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the downtown couplet. With the construction of Dundas Place, buses have already been rerouted to operate along the proposed downtown couplet. This route frames Dundas Place, circling buses along Queens Avenue, Rideout Street, King Street, and Wellington Street. Today, there is on average a bus every 90 seconds running along this route. Constructing curbside transit lanes would improve safety and capacity for all users in the core. It would also revitalize 2 kilometers of downtown streets and construct 4 modern, fully accessible transit platforms. So this slide shows you side-by-side images of King and Talbot looking east today and how it would look with rapid transit. If you've traveled in this area recently, you'll know how chaotic it can be. Currently, buses in the curbside lane have to maneuver around parked cars, stopped buses, and delivery trucks. Giving buses their own curbside lane would mean they wouldn't have to weave in and out of general traffic. This would improve safety and traffic flow for drivers. I should mention that for many downtown businesses, we recognize the importance of providing locations for loading their stock and making sure customers can reach their businesses. In consultation with business owners, we've already added loading areas at City Plaza and along King Street in front of the Market and the Renaissance Towers. We'll continue to work to find locations for designated short-term loading zones, and we've maintained on-street parking where possible, including Clarence Street, Angel Street, and Richmond Row. So let's take a closer look at that image at King and Talbot. You may know that the city is already planning construction in this area to repair underground aging infrastructure. In fact, there's still a sewer on King Street that is from 1853. So the BRT project, it would coordinate with that necessary work to minimize disruption for businesses in the downtown core. Now we're looking at the intersection of Wellington and King. You can see the roof of City Plaza off to the left-hand side. Earlier, I mentioned the safety benefits of providing a curbside transit lane. So right now, how it works is that buses are stopping under the mall on King Street. Then they have to merge into the left turn lane to be able to turn onto Wellington, get back to the curbside lane to pick up people in the curb lane. When they get to Queen, they have to merge back through traffic to get into the Queen Street left turn lane to get onto Queen. So what would happen if we're going forward? Even today, we know that that's really difficult for buses. It's frustrating for drivers. And so the project would keep buses in their own transit lane to the right of traffic along the curbside lane. So in the rendering, you can see just coming out from under the overpass from the mall, that curbside transit lane would continue on the outside up Wellington. It does the same thing at the corner of Wellington and Queens. The buses would get a left turn priority signal that operates at the same time as the existing advance screen that the traffic vehicles are using, and all of a sudden we've avoided all of that weaving that's happening today. The next corridor we'll look at is the South Corridor. Wellington is an important gateway to our city, and it's becoming more congested as London grows. It is also a major artery for getting people to their jobs downtown and in London's South End industrial areas. The road is overdue for major safety improvements and work to address flooding, including replacing 100-year-old sewers and water mains. This project would renew 6.8 kilometers of road and address those issues at the same time. For the full length of the project, Wellington would be widened to maintain 2 general lanes of traffic. This rendering shows Clark's Bridge on Wellington, just north of Grand Ave, and we're looking north towards downtown. It's a typical mid-block section along the corridor. You can see clearly that we're keeping 2 lanes of general traffic in each direction. I'll try to use the mouse to kind of point out what I'm talking about. So there's our northbound and southbound, maintaining 2 lanes of general traffic. The image is also illustrating that there is a 6-inch small curb height median that runs down the center of the road, but there's no physical barrier separating the transit lanes from the traffic lanes, just the center running median. So I wanted to make that clear because we've actually had some questions about whether the entire route and the transit corridors would be enclosed on both sides by large concrete barriers. And we wanted to help people really understand it's a single, just a curb height median that runs down the center. What that means is that these red transit lanes could be flexible to accommodate future transportation technologies. For example, autonomous vehicles. They're not physically separated from the traffic lanes. So let's move further south to Baseline in Wellington. In this image, you can see the stop flat platforms located on opposite sides of the intersection, so on the north side and the south side. Looking north from Baseline, we can see those 2 lanes of general traffic. We can also see a left turn lane and a right turn lane. At the stations, you can see that this is the one area where you would have 2 concrete barriers on either side of the stops, but that's just in the location of the transit platforms to protect transit riders. Once you extend past the transit stop, we return back to, and you can see it in the distance, that single center running short median. To access businesses on the opposite side of the road, drivers would use the signal at the intersection to make a safe, dedicated left or U-turn movement. So let's zoom in and maybe walk through an example. Let's say we want to try to get to the Bank of Montreal. So today, what you'd have to do is stop in that middle lane of the road, wait for a break in traffic, and then cross multiple lanes of traffic. Protected U-turns take the guesswork out of your left turn. When you see an advanced green at the intersection, you would have full control of the intersection to be able to make your left turn or your U-turn movement. The signal would guide you around the intersection safely, bringing you to the bank or whatever your mid-block destination would be. So now I have a really short video. It's just a loop. We're going to maybe loop through it just a couple times. It actually demonstrates, this is courtesy of York Region. They have a very similar center running BRT system, but you'll be able to see how the system works with the protected U-turn. So you can see right now it's the protected phase for left and U-turns. Some of those vehicles on either side are doing the U-turn or the left turn movement. One thing I would also point out is that during that phase, there's no right turns allowed. So those movements have full control of the intersection. I think it's going to loop one more time, but does everybody have was that clear? Would you like to see it once more? So here we go, just one more time. There's the U-turn and left turn phase. They no one else in terms of traffic or buses to contend with, no through lane traffic. And then once they're cleared, the traffic opens up for the through lane vehicles to be able to proceed. Here's another image of Wellington, this time near White Oaks Mall, looking south. Not only is Wellington a major gateway into the city, it's also an important connection to industrial jobs in the South End. The transit village planned at White Oaks would provide an opportunity to provide reliable service to help connect workers with those industrial jobs. Today, local buses stop on the White Oaks Mall property. However, with rapid transit, local buses would also use the platform shown in this image so that we could have convenient transfers. Further to the south, a park and ride facility would improve connections to other municipalities. The East Corridor would also improve transit connections to industrial jobs, so let's go there next. The East Corridor would connect Fanshawe College's downtown and eastern campuses. It would support revitalization of Old East Village and encourage development on the London Cyclands and McCormick's. This 6.3-kilometer route is highly traveled and due for safety improvements and upgrades. As with the other legs, BRT would coordinate with any unnecessary underground infrastructure revitalization. And let's walk through some examples and some images for the east. Here we are, we're looking at Oxford Street at Fanshawe. We're looking west. So this is where the East Transit Village would be located. Well, again, we're providing better service to this area, having reliable transit service, frequent service. And what that does is allows for connections from this point to then go on to industrial lands, as well as London Airport and Argyle Mall. I'm going to zoom into that a little bit more. So here I can show how rapid transit buses would come off of Oxford, enter into the campus to loop around, and then pull into a platform, which we're excited for the potential for opportunities to be able to integrate that stop actually into planned developments on the campus. So this could be a really exciting design for this transit village and its platform. But there's also the potential for some buses to be able to continue beyond the campus in mixed traffic. So again, potentially you could send every third bus that would continue on to the airport, and then you've been able to provide airport service without any increased capital costs of dedicated lanes, maybe just a little bit of additional operating costs from the additional time for driving the buses. So here's Old East Village. With proposed stops at Adelaide and Ontario, the rapid transit system would support revitalization of this blooming area. Work along King Street would complement ongoing improvements to Old East Village streetscape, lighting, and landscaping. As well, people could conveniently access the rapid transit system from different locations of the village, basically bookending the area. And here's a closer view of King and Ontario streets looking west. Through most of the east quarter, we would widen the roads to move buses out of mixed traffic and into their own transit lanes. For example, Oxford Street and Highbury, including the rail bridge, would be widened to create space for new lanes while maintaining 2 lanes of general traffic. However, there are portions of King Street and Dundas Street where the dedicated lanes would be installed by converting existing traffic lanes, which was necessary because of the highly constrained nature of that corridor. Widening in that case would have resulted in some pretty major property impacts. The same approach was taken for the north in terms of trying to minimize property impacts, so we'll head north next. Now, during peak hours, Richmond North can get very congested. It's also the city's busiest transit route, serving university employees and students, as well as people who use transit to get to and from downtown, to 2 hospitals, and to the shopping area at Richmond and Fanshawe. This project would help all commuters by getting buses out of the way, improving traffic flow in the car lanes by creating left and right turn lanes, plus bus bays to support the remaining local buses on this route. So here's how the North Corridor would look at the intersection of Oxford and Richmond. This is looking south. South of Oxford, center running bus lanes would make it possible to maintain on-street parking in that area. This image shows Richmond at Grosvenor looking north. Here you can see how the project would impact Richmond Street by St. Joe's Hospital. In addition to the transit stop, you can see there are 3 lanes serving general traffic at this intersection. We've got the through lane traffic, a protected left turn U-turn lane, and a right turn lane. Continuous transit lanes would again take those buses out of mixed traffic, supporting vehicle flow while making us able to minimize the impact on properties in the neighborhood. The west end of the city is growing, and one thing our project team has heard during consultation is that transit service isn't keeping up with that growth. So one goal of this project is to enhance travel along Oxford Street, which is a major east-west transit spine that carries both express and local routes. Along most of the route, the project would widen the road to install continuous transit lanes, keeping the same number of traffic lanes. The only exception is the 1.5 kilometers along Warncliffe, where buses would run in mixed traffic, and that's to avoid impacting heritage homes. Here's a view of Oxford and Wonderland looking west. This intersection usually has way more cars, so obviously this rendering was not taken on a Saturday. There's a lot of residential and commercial growth in this area, and that'll continue to grow with London Plan policies that support intensification and transit-oriented development. We've already seen interest from London's York developments for the possible redevelopment of the former Sears Outlet Mall site. So that wraps up the West Corridor. With that, I've taken you now through each of those 5 components of the BRT project as they're shown on the project list that was released yesterday. And so with that, I'll hand things over to Scott Mathers to sum things up and fill us up on where we're going next.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I'd like to take a moment to provide a brief preview of what you'll be seeing at the upcoming public participation meeting. As you'll see in your March 20th SBBC report, we will be transitioning from the current rapid transit naming of north, south, east, west legs, and downtown Couplet, and reframing those names to North Connection, Wellington Gateway, East London Link, West Connection, Downtown Loop. So this might seem like a very small change, but our goal with this change is to make sure people understand what we're talking about and that we are clearly identifying the impacts of the project. Terms like Downtown Loop and Wellington Road Gateway better describe the nature of these projects and speak to how a project will continue and enhance these areas for all Londoners, not just transit riders. Up to this point, rapid transit network has been studied as a single project through an environmental assessment process. By unbundling the plan, it's possible to move forward with the elements of the council may want to prioritize. While the system-wide benefits have been previously documented, each component of rapid transit can still stand alone to help provide and improve London's transportation network. The impacts of each project extends beyond transit. They represent infrastructure renewal opportunities that will have impacts for all Londoners, whether they drive, take transit, cycle, or walk. The names of the component rapid transit projects, as they appear on the project list, emphasize the overall transportation and mobility benefits for the city and its residents. At the March 20th meeting, we'll be presenting to the public a list of 19 projects. 5 of these projects are the 5 rapid transit components that we've seen today. 4 are other transit projects. 10 are transit supportive projects. And then the March 20th report also goes into and provides details on other items not talked about today, like the cycling master plan and LTC's 5-year service plan. So as far as how the public meeting will function, please expect to see a short presentation from staff where we'll briefly go through the 19 projects. Then we'll have an opportunity for council to ask questions to staff. And then finally, there'll be a formal public participation meeting with an opportunity to have input from the public. So with that, thank you for your time today, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Thank you for staying on time. And just, it's my 3rd year on Civic Works and my 1st year as chair. On behalf of the committee, I just want to thank all of you for the work you've done in terms of over the years and moving forward. It's very much appreciated, and it's been done in such a professional manner that you made the committee work very easy. So thank you very much for that. With that being said, we'll move on to questions. I'm sure the committee will keep in mind that we're not debating today what we're going to be doing in the future. So if we can stay away from that and stay focused on the what is within this report today, that would keep things on track, and I know we'll do that. So I'll open the floor up for questions. None from the committee, so Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you for recognizing me. I do appreciate it. And thank you for your comments and thanking staff. I think that's really important. And I know it's March break, and I know probably many plans have had to be changed. So thank you for that. I do have a question regarding the TMP, the Transportation Master Plan, and how it relates to the London plan. I'm just wondering, through you, Mr. Chair, if I could have staff speak to that. In particular, the question around the decisions that we've made to date. What are the implications if we start changing course to the London plan?
Through the chair, it sounds like there's a couple pieces of that question. So one's specifically to talk about the transportation master plan, but also how that might impact the London plan. I'll let John Fleming here have an opportunity, city planner, to go through that in a little bit of detail. But as far as the transportation master plan, at this point, nothing's changed until we have direction from council to make a change. As far as any kind of future impacts, if council does direct us to make changes, and the impact on the London plan, I'll let Mr. Fleming speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the key connection between rapid transit and the London plan is the London plan's vision for growing in a different way. And so through the Rethink London process, and Ms. Ramsey touched on this, but through the Rethink London process, there was a lot of conversation around growing inward and upward, and not exclusively, in a balanced way, but more of that growing inward and upward. And what the London plan suggested is doing this would be good from perspective of air emissions, reducing air emissions, energy consumption, reducing those, reducing our intrusion into agricultural lands and environmental areas, letting us get around in healthier ways, more active transportation, revitalizing our urban neighborhoods and our main streets. And I think very importantly, also, there was an assessment that was done with our engineering colleagues and development finance folks, and it was found that growing inward and upward was much less expensive, both in terms of the initial capital costs relating to that kind of growth, and it was to the tune of billions of dollars of less expensive growth. And also in terms of the ongoing annual costs of growing inward and, servicing the infrastructure and servicing a spread versus more intense form of development. So again, somewhere to, if I'm remembering correctly, somewhere in the order of $40 to $80 million cheaper to maintain a city that is more compact every year versus a city that is spread. So what does that have to do with rapid transit? Well, the idea is if we want to grow inward and upward, the question is how do we make that happen? It's not just as though you can envision it and it will happen. There needs to be tools that help you get there and levers that the municipality might be able to pull and push. One of those is in fact the London Plan itself, where there is an urban structure plan and there are significant planning and development permissions that are assigned to strategic corridors. And those corridors in the London Plan are called rapid transit corridors, and there's rapid transit or transit villages as well. And these are the way that the London Plan sees us growing inward and upward. They connect about 60% of our employment, those rapid transit corridors. They connect our downtown, our university and colleges. They connect our 3 hospitals. So they're great places for us to intensify. And this again is where rapid transit comes in, is that it's a lever, it's an opportunity for us to incent or stimulate growth and development along those corridors. So the planning permissions are one thing that the London Plan allows for, but rapid transit is what, as Ms. Ramsey pointed out, can really stimulate that kind of development demand, because people want to live along those corridors where there's that higher order form of transit provided. And as has been pointed out, we're seeing this across North America. We just need to look down the highway at Waterloo, where there's about $3 billion, over $3 billion of development along the rapid transit corridors. We see it in Ottawa, Edmonton. I speak to my colleagues in Hamilton, and they're already seeing it as they're starting to plan their rapid transit there. So it is a very effective tool that municipalities can use to grow inward and upward and realize all of those benefits the London Plan is looking for.
Anything else, Councillor? Okay. Councillor Cassidy, you had your hand up?
I did. I noticed that the mayor did too, and he's on the committee. I don't mind waiting. Oh, thank you. Okay, Ms. Ramsey, you spoke about the north in particular as the busiest transit corridor. I know when we, over the last 4 years, when we learned more and more about the different routes, we saw the ridership bundled northeast and southwest. So I'm wondering if you have an idea of what the ridership numbers are for each of those north, southeast, and west.
Through the chair, I don't have the specific numbers off the top of my head, but that's what fed into the solution to be able to select what the spacing or the headway was between the buses. So for the north and the east routes, we had planned on 5-minute spacings between buses. For the south and the west, it was 10-minute spacings. And that was a reflection of the higher ridership that you have on the north and the east with the universities, the post-secondary education, hospitals, and commercial shopping areas.
Thank you. I'm hoping maybe from the LTC at the next meeting, we might know like north compared to east, compared to south, and compared to west. Just because if we're unbundling it, I think it's important to know those numbers. So I just want to ask, I knew that, sorry, Mr. Chair, through you. North and east were 5 minutes between buses, east or west and south, 10 minutes. What would happen to those lag times if the buses were on all the routes running in mixed traffic as opposed to dedicated lanes?
Through the chair, when we move from a dedicated lane to a mixed traffic, we lose a couple of things. We lose the reliability of the system, and we lose our ability to be able to maintain the frequency that we've established. And so what we've also heard is that a mixed traffic system is more costly to operate because as buses are delayed, you have to add in additional buses to be able to make up and try to maintain that service. So it's the consistency and reliability of a dedicated lane transit system that allows you to be able to keep those costs down from an operating perspective.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. So if we had mixed traffic and say on the north leg running every 5 minutes, what would bus bays do? If there was a rapid transit stop at the intervals that have been planned and the bus is running every 5 minutes, what if they had bus bays instead of a dedicated lane?
Bus bays are a tool that you often see used in roads where there's just one lane of general traffic because it allows the traffic to be able to keep flowing. When you have roads such as Oxford or Wonderland where you've got 2 lanes of vehicular traffic, you often don't see those bus bays in those locations because it's really more of an operational issue. The amount of time that it takes to get a bus into a bus bay and re-merge it into traffic becomes an operational issue. And in those situations where you have 2 lanes, there is the ability for traffic to be able to keep moving around that. And so that's sort of the distinction. Again, that's something I've learned on this project from hanging out with all the folks from LTC, but that's the main thing. I think bus bay is really more of an operational thing based on the circumstances rather than a tool to be able to maintain reliability.
You had a question?
Thank you, Chair, I do. Through you, a couple of questions. Firstly, with respect to the Wellington Gateway. I noted at the southernmost end, Ms. Ramsey, there is a park and ride. As I was looking through, I didn't see other park and ride opportunities. I know you talked about it being a particular focus for individuals looking to go downtown, or for those who live north of that park and ride area, north of, say, White Oaks and north, for them to get to jobs. And I think if I'm intrigued by something is that I think the east-west connection on the Exeter and Wilton Grove areas, that park and ride there seems to make some sense. Would that be a combination of both parking for vehicles that then wanted to use that to drive downtown or to take this transit downtown? And secondly, would that also be considered a bus node as well for buses to be able to go from Exeter east-west and or Wilton Grove east-west? What was the thinking of your staff with respect to that, please?
Absolutely. Through the chair, the last stop, or the last formal stop on the south leg for the dedicated lanes is actually at White Oaks Mall. Beyond that, the buses would travel in mixed traffic to the park and ride that's located near Exeter Road in the 401. And the main reason for that is that the White Oaks location is where the actual transit village designation is, where that desire to be able to link in local transit, to be able to inspire intensification, that's happening near White Oaks Mall. But then the buses would be able to continue down in mixed traffic. The park and ride allows them a place to turn the buses around and head back north. It also allows to be able to provide connection to maybe people in the south that want to park and take the system downtown, or connections with other municipalities that want to be able to use that as a park and ride facility.
So again, through you, Chair, the question I have is, you've indicated that White Oaks is the area that you're focused on as that transit node, if you will, transit village, I think you've called it. Is there any issue if that were, again, appreciating the importance of getting people to jobs and back on time in that southern east-west corridor? Is there any consideration to extending the busing as you have from downtown through as focused lanes, multi-use lanes, whatever they may well be, but to having the park and ride where parking and a bus terminal or bus node, if you will, be used, if you will, having the transit village there versus, say, a shopping mall, which I guess there would have to, I guess there'd be consideration if someone's going to park a car in the mall, they'd probably want to get, if I'm White Oaks Mall, I'm probably looking for a certain consideration if there are going to be vehicles parked there to drive downtown. Thoughts around that, or how that's been considered, please?
Yeah, through the chair, one of the great things about a bus rapid transit system is that it's scalable. And buses, if you want to extend them to go further, you can do that as ridership grows, or as certain locations that have demand for transit grow and develop. One of the things that also would happen is as we move forward, every year the LTC looks at their service plan and looks at how a local service would integrate with rapid transit. So again, as needs change and as ridership change, that integration plan where local service and rapid transit come together would be able to be adjusted. So you could either extend rapid transit buses through mixed traffic to some of those areas, or you could make sure that you've got local service connections that pick up from rapid transit and take people to the jobs and the shopping areas that they're interested in.
So thank you, through you, Chair. Is that the only park and ride that's been envisioned to this point, please?
Through the chair, yes. At the master planning stage, we looked at all 4 nodes. The south was one that really had the volumes that it needed to be able to support that type of system. And so that's why we've looked at it at that area. For each of the other 3 legs, there's always opportunities to be able to partner in private endeavors, to be able to look for opportunities to be able to park along those routes. That's something that we heard when we had some of our guests in about a year ago for a rapid transit expert panel, that we had other people who've implemented this in other cities and asked how they dealt with those issues. But I think that as far as the 3 other nodes, the 3 other endpoints, again, those are meant to be transit villages where we want to inspire inward and upward growth and density, and surface parking lots are somewhat contrary to that.
This is number 4, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, but I've tried to keep my 5 minutes tight with tight questions.
Perfect.
Chair, you know, that was important. The answers are a little more extended because they're much more thoughtful than the questions, I must say. With respect to the, thank you, with respect to the downtown loop, I note that you've got that what we've been shown are the right lanes used for transit, and I appreciated when you talked about some potential flexibility going forward from your perspective. But I guess I'm wondering from the standpoint of when I heard you speak of businesses that would be able at certain times be able to unload some of their wares. I'm thinking particularly of businesses in the market, which I think you've covered off, but on the right-hand side, the businesses along King Street, which I think we are all concerned about. Was there any consideration given by staff to look at it and say a pre-7 a.m. type drop-off of stock along the line that's color-coded at this point, that lane, to allow merchandise to be dropped to owners of companies without disruption? That's not an uncommon practice in a number of cities to have that before, quote, the rush hour, if you will, time frame is done. Thoughts around that, please?
Yes, through the chair, I think we would look at a number of options to try to provide as many opportunities as we could for loading in the downtown core. So one way is to be able to look at off-peak times or times outside of the service zone for the rapid transit corridors where there could be deliveries. But again, trying to find in locations such as side streets that connect to the downtown couplet, being able to take maybe some existing parking and do designated bylaws to allow specific short-term loading zones that are in areas that will be able to use infrastructure that's actually already there to provide additional loading areas. So those are things that as we move into the next stage and we won't go towards detailed design and evolving that design, we'd be able to look for those opportunities.
So, Chair, final question until the next one, if I could, please, and that is...
You're really sneaking these in, Mr. Mayor, on me. Okay.
I will stop at this question here. When I look at the various 5 primary links that were the former bus rapid transit in its entirety, without seeing the detail in here, have there been allowances for additional right turns and bus bays and the like? Perhaps I haven't seen them, and again, the devil's in the detail, as they say, but has there been consideration given to that, whether or not there have been special lanes provided? Could you just comment on the notion of bus bays and right-hand turn lanes that, I'll be quite candid with you, when I look at places like where the McCormick home is there, and it's right now it's very limited, as we know, in terms of effectively 2 lanes. At that particular corner, and I think there's a plan at some point to justify extending it. A right-hand turn lane for those going into that part of the west end of our city would have been such a natural thing to do, and so whether it's part of the whether it's part of this consideration or not, if buses are traveling in, or transit is traveling in that route, and let's say it is not necessarily part of the rapid transit colored lanes, is there consideration along this line that while you're there to allow some bus bays / right-hand turn lanes, left turn lanes as we go? And that'll be my final question until the next one, sir. Thank you.
Through the chair, as part of our design that we have in the current environmental assessment approach, it's actually a fairly detailed design at about a 30% design level. So we've already looked at every intersection, looked for opportunities based on traffic counts for turning movements, based on the physical space that we have available to be able to determine where we can fit in right turn lanes to be able to support traffic. In other areas of the routes where, again, such as the Richmond North section, where we have one lane of traffic in the proposed design, we've extended those right turn lanes to be able to also double as a bus bay to, again, get local service out of the way of vehicles so that they're able to keep on moving.
We'll move on to anyone except the mayor. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will actually thank the mayor for his questions on park and rides because it will make my questions shorter. I have two, however. The first, through you to Ms. Ramsey, we heard you allude to surface parking at park and rides not being conducive to inward and upward. Why are we not talking about parking garages in these locations? Because honestly, not every transit rider is using transit for the entire length of their commute. Their car may be part of the commute and then the desire to get on the bus from there. So what are we looking at with that?
Through the chair, I'll pass this on to Mr. Fleming, but I think that in general, we are looking to try to find ways to do transit-oriented development that would mix uses and potentially build parking into those developments. But again, I'll pass that on to the city planner.
Mr. Chair, I should probably just say ditto. I think that Ms. Ramsey, she's absolutely right. And I would just point out that we're going through the process in Masonville of looking at that transit village right now and looking at the way that that can develop out and integrate parking, the actual transit facility, and a mixed-use form of development, which includes residential uses, commercial office, together integrated. Also point out that a big part of that conversation is going to be around affordable housing and how we can integrate affordable housing into rapid transit, which is a very affordable form of getting around versus owning an automobile.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I actually have two more questions because Mr. Fleming has created a second one. I just want a little bit of clarity. When you talk about integrating affordable housing, is that going to look at integrating geared to income housing as well?
Well, we're just now starting that secondary planning process. So certainly everything's on the table and the opportunity to have that kind of conversation is in there. So affordable housing of different types. And as you said, RGI is a possibility as well.
Thank you. And this will be my last question, Mr. Chair. I want to leave time for the mayor to get in on a second round here. We heard, and through you, I guess this question will be to Ms. Ramsey. We heard the potential for the East Link to connect to the airport and then on to Argyle Mall. I'm concerned about the word potential. Frankly, I hear from my constituents that they don't want to be left out. If we are going to do this, they want to be included. And I know that the preliminary assessment of routes early on indicated that the ridership coming out of Argyle Mall was just as high as the ridership coming out of Cherry Hill Mall. That Argyle was not included because the Fanshawe ridership outweighed the Argyle ridership. So in terms of the potential, and I like the idea of going out to the airport because it connects to jobs as well as to our international airport and the desire to have people using our airport. But what sort of feasibility study has gone into, what kind of consideration has gone into this extension in mixed-use traffic beyond Fanshawe? Because to me, that's a really important part of my consideration on the East Link.
And through the chair, I think potential reflects the fact that it is really such a fluid and flexible ability to be able to adjust how local transit connects in to the endpoints of the rapid transit system. So with respect to potential service connections between Argyle Mall and Fanshawe, one of the conventions that we have for this system is that any directly connecting local routes would be no more than 2 times the headway of the RT system. So during peak times, if the east leg is running at 5-minute spacing on buses, that would mean that any direct connecting local service that draws people from Argyle to Fanshawe would be at 10-minute spacings on those buses. And so that's something that going from in terms of a local perspective. As far as the airport, again, I was suggesting that, you know, down the road, if you wanted to look at options to actually use the rapid transit vehicles rather than a connecting local service bus, you could continue those buses beyond Fanshawe in mixed traffic. And again, that wouldn't require the capital cost of extending dedicated lanes. It would really just be an additional operating cost.
Just a really quick follow-up on that then, because what you were saying for the airport buses made a lot of sense to me. Would that extension also be possible, obviously not only on the east route, but on other routes, but on the east route, a possibility for Argyle Mall as well, that every 3rd bus might go there and then come back?
Again, I think the system is meant to be flexible. We have that ability to be able to, because they're buses, take them beyond. Again, you'd have to look at those service balances and say, what is the cost benefit of extending a rapid transit bus to do that job or connecting with a local service bus? And so I think that's something that is part of the annual service review and how local service integrates with RT. They'd be looking at balancing those different options.
Any committee members who have not asked questions yet who wish to? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for staff. When it comes to the 5 legs or portion of it, that actually wasn't what I expected in terms of breaking it up. I thought instead of breaking it up along the length of the project, it would be the depth. So, for instance, deciding whether there would be a widened road or not, a median or not, a dedicated lane or an HOV or lane or a center lane or not. So something along those lines was kind of what I was expecting. So that's, Mr. Chair, just to let you know. And if I need a metaphor for that, it'd be like ordering a sub and saying, well, if I want options, it's like lettuce or not, or so, not a 1 or 2 or 3 inch of the same thing every time. So I'll have to think a little more about how I will or won't support these.
But did you want that part of the answer, why they didn't look at it that way? Because I think Mr. Haber was prepared to answer that.
Okay, yeah,
Yep.
Thank you.
So through the chair, this is actually a history of the BRT project. So that it's actually just looking at the BRT project. The bit I believe that the council is looking at is for March the 20th. But I'm more than happy to answer the question now if you wish, but I know you wanted to stick to history.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Okay.
Do you have another
Perhaps
question?
I'd ask just, will we expect something on the 20th, or is this?
The sub thing or the?
Some different depth, are those kind of questions ones that staff will be able to deal with at that time?
If you want to answer that, that'll be enough, I think.
Okay, through the chair, yes, we'll be able to deal with it at that time, and I probably could give you a rudimentary answer now if you wish.
I'm not going to request that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a question to staff. Just preparing for the 20th, we obviously have been directed of what questions we're going to save for then. And just for we and the public can prepare properly, is the staff presentation going to be similar to what we received today, then with an addition of an overview of the 19 projects, or what can we all expect on the 20th?
Through the chair, the presentation that you'll be seeing on March 20th, it's going to be quite condensed. We want to make sure that we allow as much time as possible for the public to speak. So there'll be a couple slides that talk about history, but not to the same level as what you see today. So if you do want to review it, forward people to take the video of tonight to as a review point. But what you'll see is a really condensed breakdown of the past, and then a discussion about the eligibility, what projects are eligible, what are not, and then a slide per project, and that's 19 projects, so it'll probably be about a 15-minute presentation.
So, over on this side, Councillor Helmer, or Deputy Mayor Helmer, I told you about this. This would happen.
No problem, as long as we don't talk about it every time. I think that'll be fine. I want to say first off the hop, I missed the disclosures, and I filed my written disclosure with the clerk, and as far as it goes with the north corridor, the part that goes onto University Drive, and it could potentially impact the bridge. I have an interest through Western, which is my employer, so I just want to say that. And I wanted to just provide a bit of an answer, actually, to Councillor Lewis's question. He was asking about service into Argyle, and it's not directly related, which I think is why the BRT folks were not answering the question directly, but Route 91 is planned to, currently it stops at Fanshawe. That's an express service, and it's planned to come from Fanshawe down 2nd Street, where there's no bus service, and go to Argyle Mall. And that's to happen in 2021, so that's in London Transit's sort of longer term plan. It would obviously connect into the RT corridor at Fanshawe, and then continue down Oxford Street for people who are going that way. Similarly, there's a new Route 95, which is an express service from White Oaks Mall up Highbury, which would go to the RT station at Dundas and Highbury, and then to Oxford and Highbury. And so that would be connected into both the 91, which is coming from Argyle, and the 94, which is a new express service, again, which is going to run along Dundas Street, sort of along the route of the 2 currently, and will connect and end at Argyle Mall. And that's going to start this year in 2019. So that's already been approved. So there'll be a new 94 express bus into Argyle Mall. There will be an extension of the 91 from Fanshawe to Argyle Mall along 2nd. And both of those routes will connect into the rapid transit stations, either at Dundas and Highbury or Fanshawe College. So the Argyle Mall bus service is going to be improving quite substantially. And I think that's in response to the kind of feedback we've been hearing, frankly, from people in the Argyle neighborhood about the importance of transit. So I just wanted to say that, because those are LTC-related things that are connected into the RT stations.
Councillor Hopkins?
Thank you. I know this is my second turn here. I just, through the chair, to Ms. Ramsey, you mentioned in your presentation that we're seeing a lot of growth in the West End. I can say for sure, representing Ward 9, that we're going to experience growth in the City of London, and in the next 10 to 15 years, it is going to be to the west and to the southwest. So with that in mind, are we, do we know what the development charges are that are connected to these routes? And for instance, in the West End, we know that there's more development that's going to happen along Oxford. Is that information that can be shared to council, understanding development charges and the implications if we don't go forward with routes to understand what will be lost or gained?
Through the chair, as many of you may know, coming to the March 26th meeting will also be the development charges study, and so a lot of that work's already been done. As far as actually having calculations, we're not going to have those available for the 20th. We will be providing more comprehensive financial information for that March 25th meeting, and it will speak to the DCs as well. In the development charges background study, they have allocated certain amounts of growth to the different areas, but unless we have direction from council to change the current strategy, that's not going to change in the DC study at this point.
Thank you. I think that would be very helpful for us to understand the implications, understanding development charges and how they work and how they are applied to the routes. Second quick question for you, Mr. Chair, is the smarter traffic signals. I understand they are, from this report, that they are in all the corridors. And I know with the projects that have been sort of divided out, there's a separate amount of money assigned to the smarter signals. Could you explain what that amount represents, and if as I see in this report, they're already included in the corridor. So just to have a better understanding on the smart signals, the financial impacts as well.
Through the chair, I won't go in too much detail into the content for the 20th meeting, but just on a very high level, what we've tried to do is to allow these projects that are in that report to stand alone, as well as in combination with the other projects. So what we have, as far as the intelligent traffic signals, the entire cost to implement that, but those costs are also in the rapid transit cost. So that will be part of our discussions on the 25th to be able to show you the financial implications of what projects are selected for inclusion for funding.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for recognizing me. Through you, I was just a question with respect to Ms. Ramsey. You talked a little bit about how these works were meant to be coordinated with some of the other works that were needed to be done in terms of infrastructure upgrades. And I think in previous conversations, it's been identified that a vast majority of the rapid transit network, the subsurface works, needs to be upgraded and done at that time. Two questions, I guess. One is, do we have a sense of how, one of the purposes of rapid transit is to be able to take advantage and leverage federal and provincial grant funds to be able to help support that infrastructure work that would normally be borne by the tax levy. Do we have a sense of incrementally how much more that would cost if it was borne solely by the tax levy versus as part of this project, just the infrastructure components? And the second, when you talked about the coordination of works, that those works have to be done, so there would be business interruption and traffic interruption during those times. Do we have a sense of how much more incrementally placing BRT infrastructure during those works being completed would add to the project time? I recognize you're not going to have a precise number, but a general estimate, if it's like 5, 10, 25, 100% more.
So through the chair, there are efficiencies, of course, with coordinating the underground infrastructure renewal that is already required along these routes with rapid transit. There's, first off, the go in once and fix everything benefit of reducing disruption to residences and businesses. There's the added benefit of just the restoration costs. So, a big part of the cost of a sewer replacement job is putting the road back together. It's the digging, and when we're coordinating that, that's something that those projects can share with our group project. There's also components of the project where we're directly impacting existing infrastructure, where we will help chip into the cost of some of those infrastructure works themselves. As far as if you'd like an actual sort of ballpark for the type of savings that we had, Ms. Ramela could maybe expand on that, but at a high level, there's definitely cost savings and impact savings by coordinating that work.
Through the chair, so we often see savings of about 30% that we've looked at with our life cycle renewal partners in looking at their cost estimates for the work that they would be doing alongside. And it's typically about 30% that they'll save because we're covering the cost of the road works under our budget. So that's something that then is saving those other service areas a fair bit of money. In terms of the extra time to put the roadway back in a rapid transit configuration rather than a regular configuration, the roadway itself isn't going to be much different in timeline. There will be some additional time in terms of the stop construction, but those are outside of the right-of-way and can be phased so that traffic is moving in about the same amount of time. It's really the deep underground works that take the most time.
Any further question? Why am I not surprised, Mr. Mayor? Go ahead. You don't mind me bantering with you?
How could I ever take offense to what you say, Mr. Chair? Like ever. My second question. Firstly, as a comment, I know it's been echoed by a couple of our colleagues around the table, but to our staff, look, you've given up March break, we've got the Junos, you've given up daylight savings time. I mean, all these things that you've done just to accommodate our request to be more educated on this, and thank you. So please pass that through to your colleagues. We appreciate it. A question I have, I think, for Ms. Ramsey, and that's, I believe you made some reference to buses required for this purpose. I think the comment was 28 modern buses, I think was how you said. Now, I'm mindful that operating cost for the LTC is what it is, and it could never be qualified. The operating component can't be considered a qualification for any type of federal or provincial funding. But I'm interested in the comment about the buses, because not all things will be clearer in 10 days or so, give or take, within a couple of weeks certainly. But was the thought that whatever these number of modern buses would be considered, that would go in as a potential request through the LTC to our council for consideration? I'm trying to get a sense of that, because I know there's been talk about e-buses, there's been talk about the diesel and the like, and I'm not talking about choice, but when you said modern, and I'm more kind of focused on the quantity itself. Let's presume an adjustable number based on whatever ultimately is selected in terms of routes, all if any, and so on. But could you comment on whether you would anticipate that number of buses would ultimately come into this request, presuming that there was room within it to accommodate our $504.9 million project?
So through the chair, the buses that are required to be able to provide that 5-minute and 10-minute service on the two routes are included in the total project cost of $500 million for the full system. And it was determined based on the ridership of each leg. So again, as each leg, if it went forward and stood on its own, it would have the certain number of buses needed to be able to maintain that certain headway. Again, the system is scalable, and as ridership changes, we'd be able to adjust either the headways or potentially the number of buses, but that those buses are already included in the current business case and in the total project cost.
Chair, would you know if those were electric buses that were being considered?
I know there was a consideration of that for sure, I think.
I'm just wondering if, I'm going to presume that there's a difference between the cost. I know there is cost of a diesel bus versus an e-bus, and I'm trying to recall my numbers, but whatever that is, if it were the decision of council to consider those because of the efficiencies ultimately associated from an operating standpoint, I'm not trying to pre-sell them, I'm just, anything I've read on this particular subject, strikes me that that there will be a higher cost for those, and that's why I wasn't sure if modern meant e-bus or just meant newer, and I just wonder if Ms. Ramsey or staff can comment on that, please.
So through the chair, the 28 buses that are planned at this system are meant to be 60-foot articulated or bendy buses. And so they're a little bit different than the buses that you would see on the road today that have that bendy middle piece. The difference would be that these would have 3 large capacity doors that would open up as the bus approached each of the stops. So again, it's being able to support that high turnaround at each stop through these high capacity doors and heavy loading to be able to really turn around the times and maintain those 5-minute headways and 10-minute headways. So they are a different bus, but our business case included approximately $1 million per bus, which is enough to be able to cover either a hybrid, a high efficiency diesel, or looking towards electric in the future. We also had a presentation last year from Civic, which is a consortium that looks at different technologies about buses, and they actually had run a model of our system for electric buses to first determine whether a full electric system was feasible, and they determined it was. And they also looked at the purchase costs versus the operating costs and the cost savings over time in the life cycle of a bus, that it would balance out from that perspective.
So, Chair, my second question, and that has to do, again, back to the buses. Thank you for the clarification. One of the issues, of course, is safety of drivers. And since we're looking at acquiring buses regardless, ultimately, depending on what is decided upon, would the specifications necessarily include, and I might recommend, but that will ultimately be a council decision, the kinds of safety considerations that are there to protect the driver from curious passengers at curious hours?
Through the chair, I think the expectation is that any vehicle we'd be purchasing for this system would meet current accessibility and safety standards. So whatever the standard of the day is for protecting drivers as well as passengers, we would make sure that we'd be purchasing vehicles to that standard.
Questions from committee members. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I mean, you might have the answer to this. We have a list of potential projects broken down. I was on the understanding that this would be just a history of how we arrived at this point. When are we going to be able to ask specific questions on those specific projects?
Well, there'll be public input on it, and then I think the first meeting after that where we will be asking questions will be the 25th, am I right? Yeah. I think that's right. So no, not tonight, but on the public participation 20th, then 25th, we'll be asking questions.
Thank you. My questions is about some things we might have considered along the way. I know this would be of interest to a councillor that's not here. In a previous question, we were talking about how the life cycle of a bus might pay for itself, the added costs. There was talk about, instead of painting lanes, putting in colored concrete, and that's also something that could pay for itself over the length of or the lifetime of the project. I wonder if that's something that was considered along the way.
Through the chair, as part of our evaluations as we've gone through the project and the environmental assessment, was looking at our cost estimates and try to find options for value engineering to be able to find the most cost-effective ways of constructing the proposed system. So we actually did a very close look at the difference in costs between dyed asphalt versus painted lanes for those rapid transit. And it actually turns out that the colored asphalt is less expensive than going with the painted option. So we've been starting to collect different experiences from other municipalities. How do you maintain that when there's been a road cut? Those sorts of questions, so that, again, we can select when we move forward with construction for whichever elements we do, what the most cost-effective way of delivering that would be.
Okay, that's interesting. And may I ask specifically then about the concrete?
Generally, concrete is more expensive than asphalt in general. So dyed concrete would be more expensive than dyed asphalt. We looked at those different options. Some municipalities have used small areas of concrete right by the platforms, but the truth is that the buses are there for such a short period of time that loading really isn't an issue. So in most cases, people are using asphalt for the full length.
Okay. The next question I have is just regarding things being, sorry, what qualifies for the funding? I guess that's the question I'm going to ask. So when we talk about, say, for instance, along Wellington Road, we're putting in dedicated lanes with a median and the big new shelters. That's the most we could do for a BRT. What's the least we could do to get access to the funding? Essentially, what do we think is the least we could do in order to justify ripping up the road and then being able to get the advantage of fixing the utilities under the ground?
I just want to be careful if that's something staff's comfortable answering. That's really it may be a matter for debate next week. I don't want to put staff in the position of trying to give their judgment on something that council will ultimately determine.
Through the chair, what I can do is just, and I don't want to get into too much of this tonight as well, unless council chooses to request that. I could mention what the actual eligibility criteria are, and then you can basically take a little bit from that. So to be eligible, you need to be improving the capacity of public transit infrastructure. That's number one. Or it could be and/or improve the quality or safety of transit systems, and/or improve the access to public transit systems. So those are the three criteria. And as you flip through the appendix, you'll actually see at the bottom, it says what this particular project, what boxes it checks. And we're actually going to work on a table to provide to council as part of the added agenda that's going to provide a list of the eligibility and the different projects. So it's basically a quick way for you to see what boxes we're checking off.
And I think that's about as much as we should do, provide that preview of what we'll be doing next week, because we're not going to get into debate about what decisions we'll ultimately be making.
Okay, so perhaps a better question would have been one about Warncliffe Road, where it's in mixed traffic. is that, are we going to be doing road work or utility work underneath the road on Warncliffe as well, where it's just mixed traffic?
Through the chair, in that mixed traffic section, there wouldn't be works that are done. We'll basically be bookending that 1.5 kilometers. What you would see is at Riverside, where Warncliffe meets Riverside, a Q-jump lane that the bus would be able to pull into to then remerge into the dedicated lanes once they start up again on Riverside. Likewise, you'd see the same thing at the other end of Warncliffe where it meets Oxford. So you would, just at the intersection, you'd see improvements to be able to get the buses from mixed traffic back into a dedicated lane system.
Okay, and then my final question, it does have to do with a future meeting, but just the idea of adding things, how will staff deal with perhaps suggestions that we don't see here yet on the 20th?
They're not, I don't think they'll answer that tonight. I think they'll have to answer that next week. That is for next week. Councillor Cassidy, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I have a few questions. I'll go as fast as I can. So through you to staff, you talked about improvements to infrastructure, improvements to roads, improvements to sidewalks and cycling and all of these different things that will happen. And I have to say at this point, through you, what a great job you've done with this project and the overall improvements to different areas that wouldn't on their own qualify as transit projects. And so I really think you've done a phenomenal job in leveraging this this project to get as much of the grant funds from the province and the feds as possible. So understanding that infrastructure improvements, road improvements, all of those improvements would not qualify on their own without them being part of the transit project. How much, a ballpark ratio of just transit part of the project versus all of these extras that we're getting? Can you give me a rough idea, percentage that's spent on all this extra stuff versus just transit alone?
Through the chair, we will have that information for you. So that is a little bit in that vein of what we'll be talking about, especially on the 25th, being able to provide you those details. If I had my calculator really quick, I could add up what was in the table that wasn't the transit related, but I haven't done that. But we'll be able to provide you that on the 25th.
Can I just caution that I just want to say this one more time. We're focused on where we are today, and I just don't want us to start slipping into why we think something is better than others or what advantages it provides. So if we could sort of stick to the almost technical questions. The reason I'm saying that is because I'm being warned by the clerk that this is a special meeting on limited things, and so we want to stay within that. So we'll have lots of chance for debate and advocating and all that sort of thing, but if we could do that, I think things will move a lot smoother.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question also through you about the north leg, and understand that a portion of the north leg would envision one lane reduction. Can you tell me how many kilometers or from where to where that lane reduction would happen?
Through the chair, the portion of the north leg where we're converting existing traffic lanes is essentially from the point on Central Ave where it heads up Richmond through Oxford north to where it enters the university at the university gates.
And how many kilometers is that?
I know the project really well, but I don't have that one off the top of my head. So.
So one final question. I'm trying to not stray into places I'm not supposed to stray, but this was a question that came to mind because of what Mr. Fleming said, but I imagine it's engineering staff that would answer this. So when we talk about inward and upward versus sprawl, Mr. Fleming talked about the high cost of maintaining infrastructure. So I understand when there's new growth, when new developments happen out on the outside edges of the city, that some of that cost of the services is development charges. Some of it is tax levy. But for maintaining, Mr. Fleming talked about how expensive it is to maintain that kind of infrastructure when it's a sprawl type of growth. Is that mostly tax levy, or some of that development charges as well?
Through the chair. So when we look at that, it's really the spatial difference. So if you have a really compact community and you compare that to, like, let's say, a large subdivision, they're very different, and they're both good things, but they're just different. And in these areas, we're trying to get the intensity factor. Part of that is tax, of course, so that snow plowing, all the roads related works. But then there's also the water and wastewater, which comes from a water and wastewater rate. So the people that are making sure that the wastewater system's working and that the water comes out of your tap. So it really is a couple of different locations. And Mr. Hayward may have a comment here as well to add.
Through the chair, this is basically, it would be all tax in terms of maintaining it, or the ratepayers as indicated. But if you think of resurfacing a road costing about $100,000 per lane kilometre, if we go beyond, say, Masonville Mall, and we go all the way up to Arva, then we've got all those lane kilometres of road that we've now got to maintain, whereas if we stop at Arva because of the inward upward concept, then it's a lot less to maintain. So you can see how that would have an impact. How would we do it, though? How would we add it to the tax levy? Basically, it comes through assessment growth, and that's our whole assessment growth process. As we go through and we analyse how many lane kilometres of road we're adding, that's what we're drawing from assessment growth on that business case basis, and that's why we do what we do. It doesn't impact the rate, per se, but it does come in through tax levy.
Anything further from anyone? Questions? Councillor Helmer? No, I'm not going to say anything.
Thank you. So a question about the phasing, because this is something that comes up a lot in people's concerns around the construction disruption. And I think having things unbundled makes it a bit easier to focus in on some of the different sections, but even there, those are big sections, big projects on their own. So I want to ask about the East Corridor, which is going through my ward. We have Dundas Street planned to be reconstructed between 2020 and 2021, probably top coat finishes, things like that. We have Adelaide Street, which is scheduled to go 2021 to 2022. So those are like two major arterials in a commercial area. And then we have Rapid Transit, which is scheduled for 2022 to 2024. That's a pretty big window. It's a big segment. There's some concern that all of these things will be happening in 2022-ish, if any of the things go beyond the schedule, right? And so I wonder, in terms of the RT corridor, the East Corridor, is the idea that we would maybe connect it in with downtown loop and do that part early or later? Do we have a sense of what the construction phasing is like and what is happening in, generally speaking, in those years, 2022, 2023, 2024? Because even just widening Highbury Bridge is a major project on its own that may go at a totally different time than what's happening on King Street, for example. So I wonder if you could just speak to that at whatever level you're comfortable talking about it at this point.
So through the chair, again, it's still very preliminary. Part of what we would do going forward, once we had a staging plan, we knew what the phasing of the different routes would be to look at construction management plans. And the first thing to do is to look at all the other planned infrastructure improvements, not just along the routes, but citywide, to make sure that we can coordinate those in a way that people are still able to get around the city while we're doing this work. Another important factor is that some people may think, oh, you're going to start at one end of the RT corridor and just work your way through. It's not going to be the case. You correctly pointed to the bridges that are a very different type of work and that could potentially be done at one end of the route while we're doing infrastructure work at the other. Another aspect that will affect our phasing is in some areas, there are sections where there isn't actually a ton of underground infrastructure that needs to happen, in which case we can move a lot quicker through those segments because we're really just working at the surface level. Areas, though, where we do have deep underground sewer and other infrastructure, those sections will be slower to construct. So as we go forward and try to stage the construction, come up with construction management plans, we'll have to look at all those factors and try to make sure that we're managing things as we go forward to minimize the impact on the public.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. As most of us have already noticed, this list, at least to me, represents a certain amount of lunch bag letdown. I mean, I think that's the best way to say it. But I want to talk about, that was a very general
Okay,
statement.
we can't talk about we're not going to talk about
I'm not talking about individual projects. I'm just making a general comment.
I'll keep my mic on.
My second point is in regard to the rules for federal programming and Ontario government, for this Ontario government's program, specifically with regard, in general terms, to road widening. Are we 100% sure that it will not cover road widening, given that it will give more capacity for transit? Oh, sorry.
Through the chair, this isn't the first time that we've been through a transit-related and active transit-related program. So we are quite confident that if we went in with something that was just strictly a road widening, even if it benefited in some passive way, but the buses using that network, that we wouldn't be successful. So we're trying to set ourselves up for success, and that's why we've provided the list of projects that we have today.
So my follow-up to that is, are the rules for Ontario different than federal?
Through the chair, there is a bilateral agreement that's in place between the federal government and the Ontario government, and that agreement is what sets out those rules. So it is essentially setting those three outcomes that Mr. Mathers described, and that applies for all projects that are being submitted under. So it's not really a provincial versus federal. The agreement covers both.
Sure, but I guess what I'm getting at is, do they look at the projects differently in terms of eligibility? Because these parameters that you've outlined are very broad. I mean, they can be interpreted in many ways.
Through the chair, we don't have a very detailed application process from the province at this point. So I know that we are working with them as through our intergovernmental affairs group and trying to understand, but our current understanding in those preliminary discussions is that a pure road widening that has a little bit of a benefit to transit wouldn't be something that they would be looking at approving.
I think that's about as deep as we would wanna go. Further from the committee? Councillor Van Holst, I'll keep my mic on for you too.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try and not push the window as much. So just historically on the north leg, Mr. Chair, maybe we could have a description of how and why we decided not to widen the northern access, because of course some places were widening roads, some places were not.
I mean, in terms of the current
project, yeah, there was a number of options, I recall, to look at in the northern access.
This really is history, I think.
So there was curb lanes and there were center lanes, right. And then there was a widening and not a widening, and I wanted to look, sort of revisit that to see where the watersheds were. What was it that made us go?
Okay, but the revisiting we're not going to do, but the history we can do.
Okay, right.
You can do the revisiting when the mayor is chairing.
Okay, thank you.
So through the chair, the councillor is correct that we had at the early stages of the TPAP process a pre-planning phase where we went out to the public with multiple consultations and we offered them different options for how the routes would look. For the north, there was 4 options. We looked at center running versus curb running, and then we looked within those an option where we maintained 2 lanes of traffic or we have maintained 1 lane of general traffic. We looked at a number of factors to be able to weigh those different options and presented those factors to the public for their feedback. We looked at property impacts, landscape impacts. We looked at traffic capacity. Some of the things that we considered at the time was once the north leg of the system is in place, it would actually change things. There's the Adelaide underpass would be in place by that point. The Western Road rail crossing would be widened to 4 lanes in that location. The system running through campus would remove cut-through traffic through the University Drive Bridge, and the realignment of the Richmond and Western Road intersection intersection would all have pretty major impacts on the volume of traffic that was flowing down Richmond under the fully built-out scenario. And so when you combined the reduction in traffic with providing left turn lanes, right turn lanes, getting the remaining local buses out of that one lane of traffic, we were able to demonstrate that during peak period, the impact to traffic was only about 90 seconds. So about as long as it takes you to brush your teeth or Single Canada. And so based on that and versus the property impacts that you would have with going with maintaining 2 lanes of traffic, looking at all those options, that was the recommended solution that we provided.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to continue and ask, so if Ms. Ramsey would discuss then how and why we decided to go with the center lanes instead of the curb lanes, because previously in your talk, you were speaking about the virtues of curb lanes in some places, and then we heard about the virtues of center lanes, and how is it that we arrived at that decision, center lanes versus curb lanes on the north access?
Absolutely. In all portions of the route, we looked at center running versus curbside running. In the downtown Couplet, curbside is almost a necessity because of the one-way traffic on King and Queen. So the bus doors are on the right-hand side of the bus. It also, for many of the reasons that I outlined in the presentation, provides benefit for regular traffic by keeping them out of the way to the side. When we looked at each of the individual legs, center running versus curbside, there's a lot more benefits to center running from a reliability perspective. When you have a curbside transit lane on a traditional corridor, what that means is every time anyone wants to access a driveway or make a right turn, public vehicles are crossing over that dedicated lane. So again, you're creating conflicts and you're creating potential to reduce your reliability. When you have the center running, because we have that center median that I spoke to, the curb height median, what it does is it prevents those left turn movements across. So actually no traffic crosses over those dedicated lanes except at those controlled intersections. The other added benefit was for both emergency services vehicles as well as winter road maintenance. So again, when you have the center running BRT, the first thing that we do when we start to maintain our roads is to send out the salt trucks with a small blade. Already these RT corridors are our highest standard for road maintenance, so they'd be starting on that center run and then the salt would actually drip down to the curb lanes. It's the more efficient way to be able to maintain those roads by having the center running versus curbside where they've got to plow their way in. And then from an emergency services perspective, we know that people naturally, when they see sirens, they pull to the outside. So all that means is we've just created even that much more of a clear path down the center for emergency vehicles to shave critical minutes off of their drive.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then my last question about the north access is how and why we decided to go with Richmond instead of Western Road, because that was also one of the options that was preferred by many people.
So that discussion, that takes us back to the master planning stage. So that's prior to July of 2017. Again, we looked at multiple routes all over the city. I think there was 15 different routes compared as part of that master plan. Some of the major impacts along Western Road was heritage was a huge aspect. You know, we touched on it a little bit in our small section of Warncliffe, but if we continued up Western Road, we would have been impacting quite a bit of heritage infrastructure. There's also floodplain issues along that area, which again limits your ability to incent the type of intensification along that corridor because there's limitations on how you can develop in those areas. So there was a number of factors, and you know, again, without going through all of them, that was a master planning decision that all of the rationale is included in that report.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Any questions from Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, a follow-up to that last question. Would it be fair to say that there's roughly 3 times the ridership on the Richmond leg compared to going down Western Warncliffe?
So again, going back to the master planning stage, I can't remember the numbers for how those two compared from a ridership perspective.
And a follow-up to that, if the ridership is quite a bit higher on Richmond versus the other, would you say that the experience in other cities has shown that it's important to maintain the natural corridors that have been established over the decades rather than try to make transit riders?
We are pushing by asking staff to provide opinions that, that may or may not be supportive of particular points of view. So.
Well, this was the history, Mr. Chair. This was all part of.
No, I understand. Can I just finish, please? I'm chairing the committee. I understand that it's part of the history, but history doesn't include, is it your opinion that this is a better way of doing things? All right? And that's the difference I want to hit upon. So.
Can I rephrase my question?
Well, I'm sure you're going to try, but I took a lot of, I want to just put this into context. A lot of people said, well, we don't want to have a meeting where people get into discussions about particulars. It should be next week. And I've been really trying to make sure that's all we're doing. And quite frankly, the committee's been pushing the envelope on that, which is good for you, but it doesn't help my position as chair. So when we start asking people for their opinions and what they think, and isn't this better, I am going to stop those questions. So if you want to try, that's fine, but I just want to warn you in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate your chairing the way you've chaired this committee. I think you've done a good job, and I'm not just flattering you. You know I don't give empty flattery. But I just want to go to the history a little bit, just because we've had dozens of meetings about this project, and it's my recollection, and I wonder if staff know that other cities have experienced trying to move the established transit routes.
Well, now we're getting quizzical looks from staff at looking at your question. So I'm going to say, I think you've made your point through what you've said. So it's almost a rhetorical question. So I think we can leave it at that, if that's okay.
Thank you. And I didn't actually mean it to be rhetorical. I really was wondering if they knew that, but they might look for that for next week and have that answer ready.
Okay. Motion to receive the presentation of staff. Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. Seconded by Councillor Lewis. All in favor? And that is passed. Item 4.1, we're going to vote, sorry.
Okay.
I'm eager to, move along. That's just, flattery.
I need to do some work.
We're voting?
Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
And 4.1A, that matter has been withdrawn. It really is a duplication of what we're doing in any event. I don't see any deferred.
But we have to receive it.
We have to receive it. All right, so we need a motion to receive that, but just receive and take no further action. Somebody prepared to move that? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. We're going to vote. Councillor Van Holst.
Councillor Van Holst.
Closing the vote, motion passed 6-0.
I don't believe there are any deferred matters or additional business, so we need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Lehman, and we will vote.
Do we need to vote?
Well, we can vote with hands. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Bring your sleeping bags for next week.